Hello. Welcome back to another episode of From Mrs. to Me. I'm your host, Chrissy Freeman, and I'm excited to introduce to you my next guest today. Katrina Klooster is a former educator turned entrepreneur. After checking all the boxes that she thought were required to create success, she was left feeling trapped and knowing deep down that she was meant for something different, but she had no idea what else she would do. So she spent years overthinking and feeling confused and stuck until she hired her first life coach. At the age of 42, she began building her own coaching business as a side hustle so she could help women build their confidence to listen to themselves, trust themselves, own their bigger dreams and goals, and go after them. Now she gets to do this full time. So, welcome, Katrina, and thank you for being here on the From Mrs. to Me podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So, on this podcast, we talk about the transformation from Mrs. to Me, which is really about the identity shift that so many women struggle with, but not just after divorce. I feel like it happens a lot at midlife for women. So, the question that comes up a lot is, who am I outside of this career, outside of my marriage, outside of my kids? And so many of us sort of get stuck in that. And so I would love for you to tell the audience about your own journey of what I call discovery in your midlife.
Yeah. You know, I have a midlife experience that I'll speak to, but I had this happen prior to this, which I think would say these two experiences really have helped me to understand myself better and create really the woman that I am. But one of them was I grew up in California, all of my family is there, and I met my husband, and he lives in Iowa. And so at the time, as we were doing this long distance dating thing, I decided ultimately to move to Iowa. I knew one person
Mm,
and drove halfway across the country to this place I really had only been to a couple times. Very different culture. We live in a very rural area. And it was one of the very first real experiences where I was in that place of feeling like, what have I done? How did I get here? And who am I? I
mm.
remember a couple times just driving home from work and having to pull over on the side of the road, just sobbing and really just asking myself, like, what did I do? How did I get here? And so, in the process of meeting myself where I was and moving through that, I then, the next later on experience was very similar in this midlife transition. I felt very confused about what now, right? I was in a career that I loved. I had spent like a decade and a half building. I had all kinds of education to back me up, and I was really good at what I was doing. But there was like this, I could only describe it as this like bubbling up inside. And I remember just sitting sometimes in my office and staring at the wall and thinking, this can't be it.
Right.
And I have everything in my life I thought I wanted. And what now? Who am I really? And if I had this like desire for more, but a real fear around even allowing myself to see what that was. And
Yeah.
so as I talk to other women, I realize this is pretty common, but what I ended up doing was thinking I just need to do more. I'm not challenged enough, or this feeling of this desire for more meant I needed to do more. So I started volunteering more. I started saying yes to more things in my career. I went on to get my master's, but that feeling didn't ever leave. So
Right.
it was like meeting myself again. Like, okay, wait, we're here again in this same place, and now I've just added more to my plate. That's the only thing I've done different.
Right. And so many of us as women, I mean, as you're talking, I'm connecting so much to your story because I think that change does happen often. I mean, it happens many times throughout our lives. But I love what you said about, you kept doing more because that is sort of innately in us, I think, as women, is we have to do more. There has to be more. We have to give more of ourselves, right? So when you said volunteering, I was like, yes, of course, because we have to give more of ourselves because we're not giving enough.
Yes, it's fascinating that now as I talk to women, almost every time what they think, I think this is just, yeah, like it's like this is what societally we're taught is if you aren't happy, the answer is to do more. And you're going to find
Yes.
that in that. And so, I mean, ultimately, I did find it in the doing, but not in the way I expected. What for me, my own experience was I was doing and doing more, but really depleting myself. And I ended up being in a position where I wasn't sleeping. I was drinking more and more coffee. I was just trying to keep up with all the things I had agreed to do. And I ended up at the doctor's office with shingles and burnt out. This was at 37. And I remember
Wow.
coming in to tell my boss, I'm going to be gone for a few days and thinking, and I remember saying to him, I'm 37. Like nobody at 37 gets shingles. This is not like something is wrong with me.
Yeah.
And he said, no, don't worry. We have a couple other people here in the building who also are going through that. And I thought, wait a second. So this is accepted as normal
Mm,
that women are doing this and we're not even given a narrative like that isn't like there's something wrong here on a deeper level that we need to take care of ourselves or we need to make some changes that aren't about doing more.
yes.
And I
Yes.
was just baffled. I think I was left just thinking, there's no answer then. But this is not, I knew internally, I just knew this isn't sustainable. This is not the answer. And then I'm left with that I don't know what the answer is. And
Yeah.
so that's kind of where I started on my own journey of truly digging deeper to figure out what was best for me and what was next.
Yeah. And okay, first of all, I have to tell you, we are like connected on a soul level because I also got shingles when I
See?
was 32 years old. And, it's so funny looking back now. I think our body is speaking to us also all the time. And some of it's our intuition, some of it is when we're ill or things happen to us. It is literally speaking to us and telling us, whoa, stop. How about you just stop? You don't even have to take an action. Just stop. And we're not stopping even long enough to look at what's happening, right? And so you questioning that, at the doctor's office, like, wait a second, something isn't right here. I think too many of us, myself included, didn't stop. That shingles that I got at that time, nope, that wasn't it for me. But for
Mm.
you, it was. And so it was like a big wake up call. And so I think I just wanted to call that out because I think for listeners out there, there are signs that are coming to us that we're not headed on the right path or we need to just stop, but we're not always paying attention to them.
And it's interesting as you say that. I remember sitting in the doctor's office and and as we were going through everything and he said, "You need to do less." And
Mm,
I remember thinking, almost laughing inside, thinking, must be nice for you, but I can't do less. Like, who would do
yes,
this? And then I even said to him, I mean, I could rattle off the things I was doing that didn't have to be done, but that I was putting on myself. But the thing I said to him was, you're telling me that I can't take care of my daughter. I should stop taking care of my daughter.
right,
Like, I was just like, in my mind, what he was saying, he wasn't even speaking a language I could understand.
right.
And as I went home and I could not function. I had to just rest. And as I heard his voice over and over, I started to think, actually, I do need to do less. That is the
Yeah.
answer. But it was the scariest realization for me because so much of my identity was wrapped up in what I was doing and who I was pleasing and being this good woman, this ambitious woman. And if I wasn't doing, then I didn't even know who I was.
Yes.
That was really scary.
That's it. That's the identity piece, right?
Yeah.
It's we literally I always like try to use the example of we physically almost put on these costumes of I'm a mom, or I'm an educator, or I'm a fill in the blank, and then we start acting out that role like society tells us we're supposed to, instead of there's no supposed to, there's no perfect way of doing things, but yet that's what we believe. And so that is part of this work of, how do we become unstuck? We stop listening to external in our mind telling us these stories that aren't true.
Yeah. Yes,
So,
I love that. And when you say stop, I often use the phrase there is so much power in the pause
yes,
or taking stock. And like if we really think about that, because societally we do have these, as you're saying, we're like playing out these roles. One of them is often like this good woman or this ambitious woman. And so if that's this identity that I have, then what does that look like? What does that mean that I have to do, should do, need to do? And really looking, being more honest with ourselves and looking at, what do I think I should do? What do I
yeah,
think I have to do? And questioning all of it. But if we're so busy that we're just on autopilot like machines doing, it's really hard to ever get to a place where we give ourselves permission enough to slow down and look at what really is like at the core, right at the root, causing us to show up in our lives in the way that we are.
yeah, it's so true. And, I'd be curious for you to share with the audience, how you were able to really work through some of these fears, because I think that all of these things that we're talking about, it ultimately comes down to, I believe, fear of so many things: fear of not being accepted, fear of, not doing the right thing, or the imposter syndrome, right? Who am I to think I can do this? I mean, the discomfort. And so that's a lot of what holds us back, is all these fears and things that come up that prevent us from taking a step. And sometimes we're so far down the line of thinking these are all the reasons why I can't do this, that we're not able to even take one single step. And so my question to you is, how were you able to sort of see all those things that were sort of keeping you stuck, face them, and then still take steps towards moving towards what was really your truth, or what was really that thing that you wanted to do in order to change your life?
Yeah. So for me, one of the things that I started to ask myself, because I have a daughter, and at the time she was in early elementary school, but I remember thinking that this is who she has as her example of who she gets to be. And I had 3 or 4 days where I really could do very little. I felt I was just on the couch and just try, like I was in survival mode. And I remember thinking, this is not the example that I want to be for her. And
Yeah.
so, if I want to show up differently, if I want her to be able to have an example of something that is healthier in the way that she lives her life, I've got to be that example. And it's going to require me to get really uncomfortable with myself and be more honest. And
Yeah.
I just started looking at what I did is write down a list of everything I was doing and really examining which of these things am I doing to try to prove myself, to try to feel like I'm worthy, and which of these things do I need to give myself permission to let go of, to say no to close the door on. And so, what was like, I think if I really am honest, what was helpful for me is I wasn't looking so much at who I was in that moment, but who I really wanted to be.
Mhm.
And so being more honest about, I don't want to be a woman who is depleted, a woman who is just running around, running herself ragged, doing all of the things. And the other part of this that I came to is I'm I am maybe making other people happy, although I don't even think that's possible. That's what I thought I was doing. But in the process, I'm disappointing myself over and over and
Yes.
over again. And I just thought I don't want to disappoint myself anymore. So what do I need to do? And one of the first things was I had to call a woman who I was serving on a board, and I had to go to her house and just drop everything off I was responsible for. I was the treasurer, tell her I am very sorry, but I will no longer be able to serve in this role. And she was very disappointed, and I had to own that I get it. I was leaving her hanging, and I was more willing to disappoint her than I was myself, and I
That's
knew that was
huge.
what I needed. It was the I was just sobbing, I was embarrassed, I was humiliated. It was all the uncomfortable emotions, and it was the very first thing I did publicly, and I realized I'm okay. I did it. And
Yeah.
that opened the door for me to be able to learn how to create more boundaries, how to say no to the things that I was doing really for reasons I didn't like anymore.
Yeah. Oh, so many good things you shared. And you're right. I think that once we actually do it and we feel the discomfort and we realize, okay, I'm not going to die here. Like, I'm still here. I'm like, okay, I made it through that. That is the courage, right? That's building confidence and all the things that there is no script here.
Yeah.
We get to make these decisions. We get to set boundaries in our life. And I want to go back to what you said about the example for your daughter, because I want to connect that for the audience, because I think it's really important in both the work that you're doing and the work that I'm doing with divorced women, which is this modeling the behavior for our children, that we can show them that there's a choice for them too in their life going forward. By us, sort of living small and just being, what everybody else wants us to be, what are we modeling for them? That they need to do this also, when they're a mom, that they need to make sure everybody else is happy, but put themselves last. I mean, it's so silly when we actually step back. And I hear this a lot from women who are in that space of, should I stay or should I go, with divorce, for example, where, oh, I can't leave because of the kids. And
Mhm.
what I always love to say, if it's because of someone else, you are not doing it for the right reason. And ultimately, our kids are seeing everything, they are feeling everything, whether they express it or not. And so, modeling those behaviors that we would want to see for our kids longer term is so valuable versus holding ourselves back in this role.
Yeah. I feel like my daughter now is a freshman in high school, and I hear her sometimes say, especially to my husband, because I think it just goes, 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 and he doesn't need as much rest. He just doesn't need as much rest as I do. He doesn't need as much rest as she does. And so I've heard her so many times say, Dad, I'm not doing that right now. I will do it, but what I need right now is whatever it is.
What
And
a gift.
yes. And I think, oh, wait a second. She is really owning not what just is fun. This is about her true needs. A lot of times it is about rest for her. And so then she can show up in her life and she's doing big things. But I think we can do bigger things when we also recognize what do we need and we give ourselves permission to honor that,
Yes.
especially as women where we're not seeing that collectively. That's not what we're told we need to do. We are often sold this, we need to do more, be more, put on a smile, and just power through. But if we want to do this sustainably, it requires something different, which is
Yeah.
really uncomfortable. But yeah, if we go back to the example of that, I've been talking to my daughter very openly. I feel like more now as she gets older, when I even sometimes I say no to her if I don't have the capacity to do something, and I will explain to her, hey, I know this might disappoint you, but this is what I need. And I hope also that this is showing you that if there later down the road comes an opportunity for you that you know you don't have the capacity for, that you also will give yourself permission to say, no, that's not right for me in this moment, and move on. So, yeah, it's
Oh,
I
what a beautiful gift, though, for her. Yeah.
yeah, I think that's the thing, is the ripple effect of who we are and the changes we make in our own lives never ends if we're
No.
willing to. And I think the other thing is I always want women to know it doesn't have to be about anybody else. It actually just gets to be about you. But if you want another reason why it's not selfish, there's no need to feel guilty. It like you showing up for what you need and what's best for you positively impacts every single one of us.
Yes. And that's why I love the saying, you can't pour from an empty cup,
Yeah.
because we will deplete ourselves. You talked about feeling depleted earlier, but if we do that because we are giving, then it shows up in all of our relationships that we have. And so I truly believe it. And in that it's not Pollyanna, that if we are really filling our cup with the things that bring us joy, that make us feel in alignment with who we are, and showing up as our authentic selves and prioritizing ourselves, then it really does ripple, to your point, to use your word, to everyone else in our lives in such a positive way. And so, speaking of that and change and ripple, I do want to ask you, a lot of women struggle with this whole career change, especially at midlife. And not just career change, and for some women it's starting a new career. It's they've been the stay-at-home mom, and now their kids are maybe they're an empty nester, or they're getting to that point, or they just want to change careers because they're not feeling fulfilled anymore. I would love to hear from you, how you made that pivot. As someone who was an educator for years, how did you sort of step outside of that and give yourself permission to start over and do something totally different?
Yeah. Well, at first I didn't. Like I said, I kept doing and doing, doing more. Ultimately, I ended up deciding to make a change within. So I was a high school teacher for most of my career and ended up moving into a different teaching position. So I was making the move without really getting clearer about what I actually wanted, and thinking just changing it would make me feel different. And I realized it was a valuable learning experience. Realized, oh, that didn't actually change how I feel. I'm still feeling this pull to something different. From there, that led me into an opportunity to move into a coaching role within our school system. So I was an instructional coach, so a coach for teachers.
Oh,
And
cool.
so that opened a door into moving outside of the classroom, which working with kids in the classroom, being a teacher was so much of my identity. My grandma was a teacher, my mom was a teacher, my aunt's a
Oh,
teacher. It's
wow.
like, okay, this actually is harder than I realized to even just allow myself to break out of that identity of I am a teacher and what that means in my community about who I am and what that means about my education and all this experience and time and money I've put into this, allowing myself then to move out of that and say, oh, okay, actually I can take everything I've learned and I can use that. I'm not starting all over. I'm actually just, I've built this foundation that now is allowing me to move to that next level. One of the ways that's been helpful for me to think about this is that we are like, we're stacking skills.
Yeah, I
Whatever
love
it is
that.
we're doing in our lives is just skill stacking. So, what have you learned up until this point? If we think about in your career, in your marriage, through divorce, through being a mom, through whatever your lived experiences are, you have information that not everybody else in the world has. You have like the secrets to whatever else is next for you. And so taking all of that rich lived experience and using it for you. So from that experience of coaching, I then realized, okay, this is a little more of what I want. I'm working one on one with people. I'm helping them to grow in ways that they want to grow. And it opened the door for me to realize this is a little more in that direction I want to go, but it's not exactly where I want to go. From there, I hired a coach. And so much of the work for me was exploring who I am
Yeah,
and not just what I want to do. And I
that's
think for
huge.
so long it was so much focused on the doing, and I got to take a back. It's not that that took a back seat. I got to then be at the forefront where it was like self exploration and this journey of self discovery. And the more I learned about me and these rich experiences and all of these skills that I have, and just like who I am innately, and using all of that to then decide, how can I use my gifts? How can I use all of this in a way that is true to who I am, my core values, what's most important to me? And that ultimately is what I'm doing now in building my business.
Wow, I love that. I mean, I think that's really important to think about as we think about, I loved what you said about it's not just about what should I do? It's looking inward too about, who am I? What is it that lights me up? What is it that, I've always sort of been drawn to that is about me and not about some external force that is okay, here's the career path that somebody's outlined for me, and I'm supposed to go here to here to here to here. It's like, wait a second. Again, the whole, you said the pause, the stopping and giving yourself that time and that permission to explore that more. Because I think that's the missing piece. I mean, but I also loved what you said about just building off of what we already know
Mhm.
because you're not, I think so many people when they think about pivoting or making a change, it's like, oh my god, I got to start all over again. I invested time and money and all the things that you said, and so then they're like, nope, can't do it, this is ridiculous. And so it is that's still helping you though. That's still, it's not like that's wasted. Those are all skills that will help us to be able to take that next leap into whatever we're doing. So I love that. So can you tell us a little bit more? That's a nice little segue into the work that you are doing now in your coaching business.
Yeah, really, a lot of what we're talking about here is the work I now get to do with women. But the women that I work with are feeling that pull to something different. And oftentimes there's an external thing that leads them into this decision to do something different, to make a change, to take the leap. It often is a job change or a loss of a family member, loss of, something significant in their life, And it could be even, I think I'm inching toward this here in just a couple years, that their kids are moving out, they're becoming empty nesters, all of those kinds of things that maybe the generation before didn't, they just like, okay, this is what we're doing, we just power through. That we have an opportunity to really explore, in part because we have more time than generations before us had. We're living
Yes.
longer. And so, a lot of women at this midlife range are thinking, okay, wait a second. So I don't necessarily want to just keep doing what I'm doing for the next 20 or 30 years. What else is possible for me? And uh, one of the things, as we talked about, they've been so busy doing for everybody else. And a lot of times, this catalyst, external thing that happens, requires them to pause, and they finally are able to start to look at, wait a second, who am I? Who do I want to be? What's next for me? What else is possible? And really, so much of the work that I do is giving them a space to think bigger, dream bigger, to see what else is possible. Because so many of us, I think, in our normal everyday lives, we're surrounded by people who are still just doing the same things. And so
Yeah.
it can feel really uncomfortable to say, wait, I actually don't want what everybody else around me wants. I maybe want to do something different. Is that safe? Is that okay? Am I like losing my mind? Right. And so to allow them this really safe place to say, there's no wrong way. And you now, instead of just following what you thought you had to do, you actually get to decide. So, what does that look like for you? And exploring all the options and then helping them to make decisions, which is hard, but
Yes.
also then have their backs in the decisions they make as they build their confidence to say, no matter what decision I make, I know that I am going to be able to handle whatever happens next, and I can, maneuver and be flexible. But part of that is because they expand their perception of what their identity is. So
Yeah.
instead of just being this one thing, they're becoming more resilient because their identity isn't wrapped up in one small part of their lives. So the more, oh, it's like robust they are in their belief about who they are, the more they open their minds to say, oh, actually, I'm capable of anything I want.
Yeah. Oh, how beautiful is that? And, you tapped into something there that, I talk about a lot in the divorce community, which is, these life changes for us can be an opportunity, right? And I think sometimes, it's hard. You talk about divorce, you talk about grief, you talk about children flying the coop. Those are all really hard things, but they can also be an opportunity for us to change, for us to move and to do something different. And so I like that shift in perspective because it's scary. I mean, you just hit the nail on the head. Anytime you have to make a decision that is different and outside of this identity that we've created for ourselves, it's really, really scary. I mean,
Yes.
let's be honest. And so because we're used to showing up a certain way, and to change that and shift that script is a scary thing. And I would love to find out from you, what do you say, or how would you guide clients, because you touched about this on this a little bit, is what to do about that judgment, that external noise that people seem to get stuck in around, what are people going to think of me if I do this?
Yeah.
How do you get people out of that space
Yeah.
to
So
think differently?
the first thing I think is most of us don't realize that's the record we're playing. I think what most of the time what we will say is, I'm afraid to fail. And
Mm,
if we look at why, almost always I find that it's because we're afraid of what people are going to think about us, or we're afraid of how we're going to treat ourselves if we don't create the result that we really want. And so I think there's two parts here. One of them is building a more intentional relationship with ourselves where we are more self compassionate, more kind, more loving. And what we've been taught, I think most women, is to be harder on ourselves, to whip ourselves, to make ourselves do more. And so this is a shift in what we think often, I think, is if I'm really kind to myself, I will sit on the couch and eat bonbons and do nothing. And that just is not
Right.
true. And so I think if we want to be able to give ourselves permission to do bigger things, make changes, it requires us to rebuild our relationships with ourselves where we know no matter what, we always have our backs.
Yes.
The other
Yes.
part is then that fear of the perception, fear of what people will think about us. And this is a tough one to unhook from. Some of the things that I think are helpful is to really ask yourself, are they living a life that I want to live? And
Mm,
if the answer is no, then it just opens us up to be able to get more curious about, wait, if they're not even doing the big things I want to do, if they're unhappy with their lives or if whatever it is, right? Why would I give them a vote in my life?
yes.
And so that's
Such
one.
a good thought. Yes.
But the other thing is, I just also think people aren't always going to understand and support our decisions, and we get to let them. And
Yes.
oftentimes, I think this is even people that we know love us. A lot of my clients struggle because their moms are fearful and scared. And so their moms are telling them, oh, please don't do that. Oh, I don't know if that's a good idea. So their moms are like often the number one person they're most concerned about. And so, or, you just think about your colleagues or
Yeah.
whoever it might be. But again, if you can bring yourself back to just recognizing it doesn't really matter if you know who you are and you have your own back, then let them be who they are. This is okay. Like my
Yeah.
mom doesn't always support all of my decisions. I know she loves me.
Hmm.
She's scared, maybe, because she doesn't have the confidence, the courage to do some of the things I'm doing. And that's okay. She doesn't have to.
Yeah.
But I get to love her anyway, allow her to be who she is, and to remember it really doesn't have anything to do with me. This is her own lived experience that's based in fear.
Yeah. I always say it really isn't any of our business,
No.
meaning it's really not. That's theirs. Whatever their reason is for not approving of something or questioning something, it's really none of our business. I mean, that's for theirs to own. As long as we stay in our lane and we are confident with our own decisions on what we're doing with our own lives, that is what's important. And first of all, I love that you called out the mom because no, it's some
It
I don't
feels bad, but
it's
it's so
no,
true.
it's something with women. It really is very common that it's the mother who, but you framed it in a really important way, which is that is their own fear coming out. It really is. They love us, and that is their fear coming out of the what if. I want her to be okay. I want her to be successful. I want her, whatever it is, that is their own story and their own fear. And it does seem to be moms that hold women back. And so it's like, it's there. And I think we all just have to know it's coming from a place of love, it's coming from a place of fear, and it's their business, not
Yeah.
ours.
Yeah.
So,
I think along with that, the other point that I'm sure we're on the same page with is you aren't necessarily going to have a lot of people that are cheering you on and encouraging you to do something different. I
yeah.
think about this so often with my clients who are in careers that they've been in for decades. and they notice like nobody's really happy, like nobody really wants to keep doing this, and they complain about it, but they keep doing the same thing.
Yes.
And the women that work with me want to make a change. Well, it's really hard when you know everybody else is willing to just sit and complain and do the thing that they're unhappy doing for the rest of their career. When you choose to do something, that what happens, I think, is they see in them this fear of like, wait a second, so she's doing something else means that's possible, which then means I'm just not doing something else, and nobody wants to see that about
Yes.
themselves.
Because it
So
makes them question everything, right?
yes,
Yes.
yes. So one of the things that I think is really important is to find your people, because
Yes.
especially as women, we are built for community. Like to have people around you who do support you, that is vital, I think, for our success. I know there is nothing in my life that I have done, as much as we're sold in our, especially in the United States, this like hyper independence is the way. I have not done anything truly significant in my life without a support system.
Yeah.
And so find your people, whether that is your best friend or sister or a coach or a therapist or whoever. Find your people so that you do not feel like you are doing this all by yourself. We need community.
Yes, absolutely. I always say, find your village.
Yes.
Where is that village, and create it and build it. And you're right. It might be a coach. It doesn't have to be, somebody who is your best friend necessarily, or, it could be many different ways in which you find that support. And
Yeah.
so, oh yes, I think that is a key. With divorce as well. It's, you need a support system,
Yes.
and it is essential in all these life changes. So, well, I feel like I could talk to you forever. I mean, unfortunately, we're now getting to the end here, but I would love for you to share with the audience, how can they work with you if they want to work with you? How can they find you if they want to learn more about you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can go to my website. It is www.katrinakluster.com, or Instagram is primarily where I am. So if you go to Instagram, it's at Katrina Klooster. And if you want, like if social media is not your thing, I understand that. But if you go in either to my website or if you go onto Instagram, you can also opt in to get into my email list. I send out what I call an invitation weekly, where it is really for us to connect, for women to start to think about leadership, self leadership, about what we really want, about showing up in our lives and making changes. But from a place of, I never want to be a woman who is telling women what to do. I think we have enough of that, but more opening ourselves up to exploring more of who we are, what we want. So that is a way for us to connect if you're interested in learning more about yourself in a way that's not on social media. So
Great.
I'd love to connect you with whichever way is most supportive to you.
Great. And to those of you listening, that all that information that Katrina just shared will be in the show notes as well. So, Katrina, thank you so much for being here. So much valuable information that you have shared. And I am looking forward to following you and learning more about you as well. And also for the listeners out there, just as a reminder, there is an upcoming retreat on October 26th that I am putting on here in the state of Maine. So go on my website to learn more at FromMrsToMe.com. And as I always like to say, remember, you can't pour from an empty cup. So keep doing that inner work, and I'll see you here next time.